It's also really important, I think, and useful to remember that in the medieval period, music was rooted in language and in song. So instrumental music didn't develop as a separate thing until later in the medieval period. And before then, music, even when played on an instrument, was understood to imitate song and language. And in the Gaelic context, it's the Gaelic language, the speech rhythms in particular, that influenced the style of music that people were performing. And that's relevant in thinking about how these new music and dance innovations were adopted and adapted in the Gaelic context. So what do we know about dance in the very early periods, like before the modern era? Well, there is no native word in Gaelic for dancing. There were medieval translations of of biblical texts that were done by Gaelic scholars in the medieval period. And when they came across, descriptions of dancing in the Bible, for example, the terms that they used were clesiocht, so feats or trick. This is modern Gaelic clesoch. Leimante, so this is modern Gaelic. Leim meaning leaping or jumping, or operach meaning just exerting themselves. So there's no word that signifies dance as we think of it now in the Gaelic language before the modern era. The terms that we have in the modern era are borrowings from, particularly from French. So there's kind of two forms of this in Scottish Gaelic. There's Dannsa, which I believe is directly borrowed from French into English. And then there's Dannsa, with more of a n sound. And I believe that this would have been borrowed via English, French to English to Gaelic. In modern Irish, the dominant term is rinke, and many scholars have pointed to the word rink, an area for sports. Personally, I think it's very possible or more likely that it comes from rink, which is a Middle English term for the circle dance that was done, which I believe was like the common form of dancing before the modern forms of dancing that came in. There are many Gaelic texts that describe, feasts and social occasions where people are playing music, but there are none before the late 16th century that mention dancing at all. And even then, they're very, very rare until the late 17th century. So again, this is a sign that something new is happening because it's coming in from the outside world. Regardless of that, what can we say about what was done before these later importations? Well, in vernacular cultures all around Europe and around the world, people move their body to music. So, we shouldn't doubt that people did something that could be called in some way dancing. Um, Dance is universal, right? People are going to they're going to respond bodily to things that they're hearing and that they're performing. And would have particularly been the case during things like rites of passage and calendar customs. There are these ritual dramas, and there are occasional references to these. So there had to have been Gallic equivalents of these things in the pre-modern era. And it's kind of more obvious in texts that were written in medieval Latin and English, maybe because they're coming from an outside perspective. So there are references to people singing while moving in rings and chains. And again, this is, pan-European and pretty much a global thing. However, I think it's also pretty safe to say that Gaels did not see dancing as something that was separate from the music, kind of a natural response to the music, that they would have been seen as kind of the same thing that you were doing. And so there was no need for specialized terminology. It wasn't some sort of refined, complex thing that had to be learned.